Why would anyone object to digital ID? Here's the truth they don't want you to know. Why would anyone object to digital ID? It's not any more than the IDs we've already got, is it? It's just consolidating things to be more streamlined and efficient. Surely it's only about catching people who are doing bad things. People who are following the rules shouldn't have to worry. It's unnecessary to worry about it. After all, it's only about improving government efficiency, making it easier for us all to access what we need and communicate with the powers that be, right? That is indeed what our politicians would have you believe, but I'm so very sorry to be the bearer of bad news. None of that is true, and so I thought it was about time I joined the voices of those putting together why. It's not mandatory. In January 2026, after massive backlash, the government scrapped the mandatory right-to-work element, but the infrastructure rolls on anyway. I'm sorry to tell you that those not mandatory words are rather meaningless. We know mandatory is their intention. There is an extremely dismissive assertion by the government that digital ID will go ahead regardless of any and all public opposition in the most authoritarian and un-British stance I have ever seen from the House of Commons. Last year, nearly 3 million people signed a petition against it. This has led to the decision to still go ahead, only now it will be by stealth. As it is slowly implemented across services, it will incrementally become more and more impossible for people to go about their day without it. You won't have to have it, but if you don't, it will be made more difficult to work, access healthcare, rent, or buy a home, or not without extensive workarounds and additional cost at the very least. A passport and/or driving license will no longer be enough. It will fix illegal immigration. The government have made many assertions about the reason for digital ID. One is that it will tackle illegal migration by enforcing right-to-work checks, but this claim is deeply flawed. Illegal immigration is driven by complex factors: economic disparity, global conflicts, and trafficking networks, none of which are addressed by digital IDs. In fact, criminal gangs facilitating illegal migration already forge physical documents. They will adapt to exploit digital systems, as seen in other countries where digital IDs have not reduced illegal immigration at all, e.g. India's Aadhaar system, which has had no impact but has faced massive fraud and data leaks. Requiring employers to check digital IDs may also burden businesses without deterring determined traffickers who already operate outside legal frameworks. It is nothing more than a distraction to mislead the public from the only real solutions to illegal immigration, which are effective border control and international cooperation. But it will streamline services. Government have claimed digital IDs will streamline services, but these promises are a bit of a unicorn in our system of over-regulation and massive bureaucracy. Instead, it bakes into the system additional risks of centralized sensitive data, including biometric, health, or financial, which makes them a prime target for hackers. With the government's recent push to expand live facial recognition technology nationwide, which they're planning to increase from 10 to 50 mobile vans for police forces across England and Wales as part of major policing reforms announced in late 2025, an investment of around 11.6 million for the national rollout, this biometric integration becomes even more alarming. The Met Police recorded nearly 117,000 phones stolen in London alone in 2024. Imagine that extrapolated across the country. Reliance on mobile devices heightens the risk, as criminals could access entire identities from stolen phones. the numbers will likely only increase. Once biometrics like facial scans or fingerprints are enrolled and linked to any digital ID system, a breach makes identity theft potentially permanent and irreversible. Unlike a lost card or passport that can be cancelled, you can't change your face or fingerprints. Even with promised security, no system is immune to breaches, and a single failure could lead to catastrophic consequences on a mass scale of identity theft or financial loss. It will only affect those who are doing things that are wrong. The potential for abuse with digital IDs is deeply alarming, enabling mass surveillance by tracking individuals' movements, transactions, and behaviours. This is compounded by the aforementioned rollout of widespread facial recognition, which normalizes constant biometric scanning in public places and could feed directly into broader tracking systems. Even if this government's intent was pure as the driven snow, which I seriously doubt given their evasive, flimsy justifications and apparent intent to ignore citizens and even bypass proper parliamentary process, their response utterly fails to address how future administrations could exploit this system to suppress dissent, discriminate, or target specific groups. Look at how this infrastructure could enable social credit-style scoring and controls. Already we see drives toward monitoring personal banking transactions, restricting spending in certain ways, and tracking things like individuals' carbon footprints through purchases and behaviours, and disastrously tracking speech through social media, all of which would be far easier and more intrusive with a linked digital ID and biometric database. Imagine losing points on your social credit score for disagreeing with the government's position on taxation publicly on your social media account, which impacts your ability to rent your home or having your freedom to travel on holiday removed because your recorded carbon footprint is too high by the time summer comes around. None of this is outside the realms of possibility. We've seen mass censorship and controls via banking in other countries around the world already, where data is repurposed for things like social credit systems, threatening personal autonomy. Maybe these are expected in countries like China. However, we also saw Trudeau in Canada freeze the bank accounts of protesters and those supporting them through donation platforms a few years ago, which was an absolutely shocking abuse of power, second to none. And we don't even have to look that far away. Right here in the UK, Oxford is launching a trial traffic filter system from August 2026, where drivers must apply for permits allowing access through certain zones on a limited number of days per year. Up to 100 for residents in designated areas, far fewer for others. Automated ANPR cameras enforce it with £70 fines, reduced to £35 if paid quickly, for unauthorised travel, effectively requiring permissions to move freely around your own city, with penalties for exceeding approved days or routes. Critics call it a blueprint for broader restrictions on personal mobility. Layer on top of that the potential for a central bank digital currency, the digital pound, still in design phase through 2026 with no final decision yet from the Bank of England and HM Treasury. If introduced alongside digital ID, it could enable programmable money, where transactions are tracked, restricted, or even auto-blocked based on your score or compliance, e.g. carbon limits freezing spending on flights or high-emission goods. And those very travel fines in cities like Oxford are applied to your account direct at the moment of your infraction. Combined with digital ID's biometric linkage, this creates a perfect storm for automated, real-time enforcement of behaviours the government deems unacceptable, far beyond what cash or current banking allows. Imagine refusing the latest vaccine or booster. Suddenly your digital ID flags you, restricting access to public transport, certain shops, events, or even international travel, all automated and tied to your compliance profile. We've seen echoes of this during COVID with vaccine passports limiting freedoms based on health choices. Digital ID and digital currency could make it permanent and inescapable. With Labour and the Conservatives, who have dominated politics for a century, now hemorrhaging trust as their approval ratings collapse, it's impossible to predict what parties will rise in future and exploit this system. History warns of the dangers of unchecked power. With the implementation of AI, the cost of running an authoritarian regime has dropped exponentially, yet the government's response glibly dismisses these concerns, claiming compliance with data protection laws that are woefully inadequate. It will save money in the long run. The implementation of digital IDs would impose a staggering financial burden on taxpayers, with the industry estimating upfront costs of $1.2 billion to $2 billion and annual running expenses at $100 million or more, all while risking the same catastrophic failures that have plagued recent UK government IT projects. Look at the NHS's National Programme for IT, a centralised tech debacle launched in 2002 that ballooned from $6.4 billion budget to over $10 billion by 2013 without delivering key benefits, riddled with delays, contractual disputes, and technical glitches that left patient records fragmented and clinicians unsupported, ultimately dismantled. More recently, the 2020 NAO report slammed the NHS's ongoing digital transformation for failing to learn from that $10 billion fiasco, highlighting persistent risks of poor stakeholder engagement and adaptive failures that could easily doom a national ID scheme to similar waste and unreliability. These aren't isolated blunders, they are systemic, underscoring how digital IDs would compound threats to freedom with impracticality, squandering public funds on a surveillance tool dressed as efficiency. And further logistical nightmares abound. Inadequate infrastructure could lead to widespread system crashes, exclusion of non-digital users, and massive training demands for employers and officials, diverting resources from vital services amid a cost of living crisis. The infrastructure required has immense energy requirements to power the massive data centres needed, handling constant biometric processing, real-time verification, vast databases of personal data, and integration with facial recognition would be enormously prohibitive. Current UK data centres already consume around 2.5% of the nation's electricity, with projections showing demand could rise fivefold or more by 2030 due to digital growth, including AI and related infrastructure, straining the grid further. Adding a centralised digital ID backbone would only exacerbate this, completely undermining the government's own push toward net zero, which is another whole disaster for the country to be covered another time. It's unlikely the grid could reliably maintain necessary levels without substantial new capacity that isn't materialising fast enough amid existing constraints and delays. This could lead to massive power cuts and blackouts, and with the cost of energy continuing to rise, the cost could spiral beyond all current estimates. But it will help those who don't have ID now. The claim that digital IDs will aid the 1 in 10 UK adults without physical ID ignores how the system could exclude others, like the elderly, low-income individuals, rural residents, the homeless or poor, anyone lacking access to the necessary technology or not having the skills, deepening societal inequalities and adding to the gap between rich and poor. Recent data shows this risk is stark. Around 1.6 million people remain offline entirely, while nearly 4.5 million adults, about 8% of those over the age of 16, do not own a smartphone, with that figure rising to over 1 in 4, 28%, among those over 75. Millions more lack essential digital skills. Around 11 million adults struggle with basic online tasks like setting up email or filling forms, making any reliance on apps, smartphones, or internet connectivity for identity verification a barrier rather than a help. Low-income households often can't afford broadband, data plans, or devices, forcing them to ration usage or rely on public hubs that may not be accessible or reliable, making them more vulnerable to hacking and identity theft. Rural areas face additional hurdles with poor broadband coverage, while the homeless, disabled people, and those in deep poverty are disproportionately affected by these barriers, compounding existing disadvantages in accessing jobs, services, benefits, or even basic participation in society. Far from closing gaps, a digital IC system risks widening them dramatically, leaving vulnerable groups further marginalized and unable to prove who they are in an increasingly digital world, turning what the government pitches as inclusion into yet another layer of exclusion for those already struggling the most. They're only doing what they think is best for the country. The government has no mandate for this policy, and it has been roundly rejected by citizens, not only with the petition's near 3 million signatures in a matter of days, but multiple times previously, reflecting overwhelming public opposition. And not just from British citizens. They've seen the same opposition from inside the House as well, as MPs have stood against it. However, the government's response suggests implementation will proceed without any further scrutiny. This arrogance is further eroding trust in politicians already battered by controversies over the past 2 decades. Forcing digital IDs on an unwilling public risks a revolt at the voting booth as citizens reject this assault on their freedoms, which can only lead across to the right. So what now? Our MPs' roles and responsibility towards us, their constituents, is to fiercely protect our rights. The British people are crushed under excessive regulations that stifle growth, a worsening cost of living crisis, an ever-increasing tax burden, and now threats to curtail every aspect of our freedom. It is time for our politicians to act decisively to protect our civil liberties. I urge each and every British citizen to take a stand and challenge this authoritarian policy. Demand it be brought to an end. Sign the petitions, write to your MP, peacefully protest and vote against anyone who would support its implementation. The time to stop it is now. And please do feel free to use any of this information above to write to your own MP to express your wish for this to be brought to a swift end.